So, you want to save the world with clean energy? Make money doing it? Confused about the economic and technical realities of residential and commercial solar, batteries, heat pumps, EVs? Want the real-world scoop on new energy technologies, not manufacture hype? Then tune in to the Weekly Energy Show, hosted by Barry Cinnamon. Insights from Barry's 40-plus years in the solar and energy industry will help you understand the future ways we'll generate and consume energy. And now, here's Barry.
Welcome to this week's Energy Show. Now, today's show is all about the growing trend of countries, companies, and leaders copping out on practical and cost-effective ways to reduce global warming. There's three cascading cop-outs. First, individual cop-outs by our leaders, most notably President Trump. Next, business cop-outs by companies. And third, global cop-outs by countries at the UN Climate Change Conference, which happens to be going on the week that we're doing this recording. It's becoming increasingly clear that global warming is a fact. We use something called the EnRoads modeling system, and based on that, we're on track for a 3.3 degrees C increase in post-industrialization global warming. Now, the fundamental problem is that fossil fuel companies, countries, and leaders want to continue burning coal, oil, and gas. It's obvious. We're not fixing the obvious problem. And they're prioritizing profits over climate change. Now, talking about leaders, there's nobody more negatively influential on global warming than Donald Trump. He's copping out. Now, he started his climate change cop-out as soon as he had power when he became the president in the White House, both times. So, to be realistic, he's not really copping out. Trump was never cooperating in when it came to global warming. None of this is a surprise, but his activities are extremely damaging to global efforts to reduce warming. Donald Trump's trying to remake the United States as a drill, baby, drill petro state. You know, as I mentioned, we're at a 3.3 degree C increase in global warming temperatures right now. That's the trajectory that we're in right now. It's gonna get worse. This trajectory is pretty much established before Trump's second term. I understand why he's doing it. Is the country and personally Donald Trump make a lot more money from fossil fuel companies as their businesses expand. It's very transactional. There's no big concern or care about health and our environment. Trump calls these efforts to reduce global warming the green news scam. Now, quite frankly, I find that very insulting. He's killed key provisions in the Inflation Reduction Act. He's dismantled the EPA and many other U.S. environmental laws. He's withholding previously authorized funding for approved solar and wind projects, many of which are already under construction. I mean, boy, think about these companies that have invested billions of dollars in offshore wind, and he's just saying, scrap it and stop spending. Bankrupting companies, not that he really cares. You know, and to make matters worse, he's punishing other countries for their own independent efforts to reduce global warming. And from a United States standpoint, he's doing everything he can here in the U.S. to reverse our progress on energy efficiency, on clean energy deployments, on U.S. clean energy manufacturing. I mean, here's an example. The Solar Industries Association recently released a report saying that political attacks threatening 500 U.S. solar and energy storage projects total over 116 gigawatts of capacity. That's a huge amount of energy producing capacity that he's trying to wipe out. And, you know, kind of looking at it from a high level, he's wiped out half of all planned electricity capacity additions nationwide since through 2030. That's including wind. But I think about things like oil drilling, drill baby drill. Well, he's opening up the West Coast to oil drilling. And, you know, note that, not surprisingly, he's prohibiting drilling on the U.S.'s East Coast. That's purely political. He doesn't want to have any oil derricks or any drilling off the coast of Florida where he lives, but he could care less about California. I think he's actually trying to punish California. And all the while, as the rest of the world, even Saudi Arabia, are prioritizing clean energy investments and deployments. So my message for Donald Trump is simple. Follow the science, not the money. Unfortunately, he doesn't care. That message is going nowhere. He's determined to tear down on environmental progress and shut down future clean energy businesses. And the goal at a high level that he's trying to demolish worldwide efforts to combat climate change. And he's trying to create a new coalition of countries that would depend on U.S. fossil fuels. He's going around the world saying, buy natural gas, buy oil from us, otherwise there'll be some kind of punishment. It's interesting, the press picked up a comment by Governor Newsom of California at the COP conference recently, and this pretty much summed up the whole climate situation. Newsom said, we've talked in the past COPs about the polluted heart of the climate crisis being big oil. Increasingly, the polluted heart of the climate crisis appears to be Donald Trump. Well, we talked about Trump as the biggest cop-out, but we have another surprise that Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft and one of the world's richest people, is also copping out. And I was actually surprised about this change in heart. He's not in the same climate denier league as Trump, but he's an influential leader nonetheless. And he recently published a memo in which he says that we should change our focus away from emissions and global temperature increases, and instead focus on preventing suffering and improving lives. To me, it's not an either or choice. We need to do both, but it seems like he's throwing in the towel on focused efforts to reduce global warming. We already have a great metric on global temperature increases and emissions. We can measure global warming. We can check our progress, and unfortunately the lack thereof. We can achieve reducing global warming because we're able to measure it. But it's very difficult to measure suffering and the quality of life. And that's a transition Bill Gates wants to go. He wants to focus more on improving our quality of life and reducing suffering. But it's very hard to measure that. Just because we're not progressing fast enough on global warming doesn't mean that we worldwide should abandon that focus. It's fine if Bill Gates wants to do it. So Bill Gates has three of what he calls climate truths. And I just want to summarize those and comment on them. One truth is climate change is a serious problem, but not the end of civilization. I agree with that. I don't think humanity is going to end because of global warming. Candidly, AI is more likely to terminate humanity. Second climate truth is temperature is not the best way to measure our progress on climate. He's wrong about that, flat out wrong. You can really track it. It's an objective measurement, and we can all wash it. There's multiple ways of measuring that. Global temperature is the best scientific way to see what's happening. It's a temperature, and it correlates with gradual increase in misery. It doesn't correlate to the quality of people's lives, but that's not what we're trying to solve for. When we're trying to reduce global warming, we're trying to reduce the temperature of the world. All right, his third point is health and prosperity are our best defense against climate change. That's false. There are better metrics for health and prosperity, such as longevity, leisure hours, and income. Bill Gates was never really all in when it comes to practical global warming solutions. His focus on long-term, long-shot investments is not reducing global warming one bit right now. These investments aren't going to take effect for 10, 20 years or more, especially some of his nuclear investments. Nuclear fission, he's been pushing the concept of small modular nuclear reactors. It's kind of a good idea. It's a little bit more mass production instead of totally customizing things. But the first SMR is still not approved. And we're looking at how long it takes to put in existing improved reactors like the Westinghouse 1000 reactor. Those reactors, the last one, it took over 20 years and over $20 billion to get the last fission plant installed, the Vogtle plant in South Carolina. Nuclear fusion, I think we're even farther out from that. These test fusion plants are producing about as much net power. And net power is how much power is coming out of these new fusion prototype plants versus how much power goes in. They're getting the same amount of net power as a single flaring match. That's de minimis. We're still 30 years out from scaling. Heck, I remember reading Popular Science and Popular Mechanics 50, 60 years ago, and it really hasn't progressed much past that. I'm biased towards nuclear fusion. I think nuclear fusion's a really great idea, but we're going to use that nuclear fusion plant that's 92 million miles away from Earth. And finally, these are all other good investments. He's been making investments in carbon capture, such as direct air capture or DAC, with a couple of companies called Sustair and Heirloom. But these concepts use a tremendous amount of energy. And what's happening is because there's some investments in direct air capture and carbon sequestration, that the fossil fuel companies are saying we can keep burning fossil fuels and polluting the air with CO2 because we're going to find a way to take that out. Well, we haven't found a way to take that out. And essentially, the possible potential for DAC and carbon sequestration is that it's going to extend the demand for burning fossil fuels for many years going forward, and it's going to make global warming a lot worse. Okay, well, we talked about leaders. Let's talk about companies copping out. Now, the U.S. companies are changing their mind about fighting climate change. They're going along with backing away from investments in clean energy. I get it. Companies don't want to fight against the Trump administration because Trump is going to get mad at them and it may impact their profits. Still, it's a cop-out of what's on the global warming that's happening on a worldwide basis. Now, there's a new study from the Haas School of Business, and they found that almost 40% of the companies that set 2020 emission targets either missed the mark completely or simply stopped reporting the targets. And just some examples, Walmart, they expect missing their emission targets. Coca-Cola dropped a goal for reducing new plastic use. Alphabet, Google's parent company, ended its carbon offset program. Nike laid off their sustainability staff. The U.S. auto industry as a whole has spent millions and millions of dollars over the last few years in an effort to dismantle a decade of policy progress on U.S. vehicle efficiency and greenhouse gas emissions. Corporate average fuel economy standards are trying to be relaxed, and they're pushing back on implementing electric vehicles, which are by far and away the most effective way to long-term reduce emissions on our roads. A 2025 Sierra report identified many utilities, including Entergy, Duke Energy, Evergy, Cleco, American Electric Power. They've backtracked on their climate commitments. I have to say that I don't really see PG&E making a big backtrack. That's our local utility here. They're doing bad things in other ways, but they're not backing away from that. In fact, they want to put in more solar and wind, and they're just getting fundamental pushback from that from the administration. Finally, at a high level, this is on a global basis, the UN Global Climate Conference is turning out to be a big cop-out this year in Brazil, but previous years, it was terrible. I no longer have high hopes for the COP conferences. The fossil fuel companies have managed to hijack effective efforts to slow down global warming. The last 2 years in Azerbaijan and Dubai, countries dominated by oil drilling, no climate change commitments that significantly reduce burning fossil fuels have been passed, no commitments. I look at these conferences right now as wishy-washy, feel-good, worthless activities. As a result, country commitments have diminished. They haven't increased. That's a literal cop-out. Now, at this year's climate change conference, COP30, Brazilian leadership's putting climate adaptation and human development high on the agenda. That's a good idea, but it's adapting to climate change and focusing more on human development rather than cutting back CO2 emissions. But Brazil, understandably, it's a big oil exporter. They're cutting down tremendous amounts of forests, and I don't expect any major commitments or changes in worldwide climate investment trajectory at COP30. Now, the U.S. is one of the biggest emitters, along with China and India. And the U.S. is, by far and away, the biggest anti-climate change country in the world. Trump's not sending any official U.S. representatives to COP. Responsibly, a number of other U.S. climate leaders are attending. California Governor Newsom is there. He's probably the most notable U.S. politician focusing on practical and economic solutions to global warming. And one of our local California senators, Josh Becker, is also there. And these Californian politicians are pushing rapid transitions to EVs that we're experiencing in California, building energy efficiency, preventing drilling along the California coast. And candidly, on a more relevant solar standpoint, Newsom should accelerate home and business rooftop solar installations instead of acting to kill that market. But, all in all, there's just no comparison. He is the best U.S. leader as far as climate change goes. And any final COP deal that may come out, that will come out, they always sign something, and pretty much over the last few years hasn't really mattered. But any climate deal that comes out is going to mean somehow finding a consensus. And the consensus is going to have to be tolerated and approved by the world's biggest fossil fuel producers. And what's going to happen is that those consensuses are not going to really be material. We're going to try to reduce fossil fuels, or we're going to do it in 10, 20 years. What's going to happen is small island states are getting washed out, literally washed out from sea level rise. I'm not optimistic. So kind of looking at conclusions and what we can do better. We need better leaders who understand and act to reduce global warming. It's purely a voter choice. We can elect better politicians. And in California, we've done a pretty good job of that. In other states also. On national level, Trump is a disaster when it comes to climate. And ultimately, the climate's going to have an impact on economics. Second, we need companies who stand up for the environment and reductions in CO2 emissions. They need to do the right thing, but they have to fight that trade-off against potential retaliation from Trump, from the Trump administration. And finally, we need to rethink the whole concept of the UN Conference on Climate Change. These conferences have been completely co-opted by fossil fuel companies. The decisions and the consensuses that come out are not moving the needle as fast as we need to. They're fundamentally not taking action to fix the biggest problem that we have for global warming, which is the continuing and in some ways accelerated burning of fossil fuels. That's all the time we have on this week's Energy Show. Thanks to all of our listeners for tuning in. And if you miss any of today's show, you can always go to our website at energyshow.biz and listen to the podcasts.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's Energy Show.